Good afternoon and welcome to Hudson Institute's Walter and Betsy Stern Conference Center for our event today on Latin American recognition of a Palestinian state, repercussions for U.S. and Israeli diplomacy. I'm Ken Weinstein, President and CEO of Hudson Institute, and we are celebrating this year 50 years of forging ideas that promote security, prosperity, and freedom. We at Hudson have a long track record of research on both Latin American affairs as well as on the Middle East and on the intersection of both. Our Latin America Studies Director, Jaime Darrenblum, was among the first here in Washington to warn vigorously years ago of the burgeoning Iran-Venezuela axis. Today, however, we're examining another issue: the Palestinian Authority's successful drive for diplomatic recognition in Latin America and what it implies for Israel, the Middle East, and for U.S. foreign policy. This has obviously been an extraordinarily busy week in Middle East affairs in Washington with Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit, and especially in our second panel, our distinguished experts will examine broader implications of the Palestinian effort. Before I turn it over to our Director of Latin American Affairs, Jaime Darrenblum, let me simply say that one of our speeches today will be in Spanish, and there are headsets available if you need them for simultaneous translation. Please raise your hand, and our interns will get you a headset. Let me ask you also to put your cell phones on vibrate rather than on ring before we get underway. Now I have the distinct honor of turning it over to Jaime Darrenblum, who directs our Center for Latin American Studies. Ambassador Darrenblum needs no introduction, especially here at Hudson Institute. A lawyer and political economist by training, he blogs for the Weekly Standard and for Pajamas Media, and is a columnist for La Nación in Costa Rica. He, of course, served with great distinction as Costa Rica's ambassador to the United States before joining Hudson Institute. Jaime.
Thank you very much, Ken. Our panel will look closely at the Palestinian Authority's efforts toward the recognition of a non-existent Palestinian state. We will try to make sense of the wave of diplomatic blessings to an entity which falls rather short of the minimum requirements needed under international law to conform a state. In particular, we'll look more closely at the mechanisms, the political currents, and the motivations of the Latin American governments which issued such recognition. What role, if any, played Iran in this movement? Were Israel and the United States indifferent or remiss to what was in the making among leading South American governments? To throw some light on this and several other questions, we're privileged to have with us an outstanding panel of experts from Latin America. Speaking first will be Pepe Eliashev, a leading journalist, noted author, and TV and radio personality. A native of Buenos Aires, Pepe has had a distinguished career spanning since 1964 as a journalist in his native Argentina, Europe, and the United States. He currently writes for Perfil in Buenos Aires, for Popular, and for El Día in La Plata. He will be followed by Samuel Feldberg, a noted political scientist and international analyst from Brazil. He is a graduate of Tel Aviv University and the University of Sao Paulo, where he has been teaching since 1998. He's a prolific writer and a leading expert on Brazil's foreign policy, as well as Middle Eastern affairs. He's also a senior research scholar on the Holocaust and anti-Semitism studies at the University of Sao Paulo. The view from Central America will be given by Armando González, the corporate op-ed editor-in-chief of the La Nación Media Group in Costa Rica. Armando is a leading journalist in Latin America. He studied journalism in Costa Rica and the United States. Aside from his very busy practice in La Nación, where, by the way, he's my boss in that endeavor, he's also a columnist. Armando is recognized as a driving force in the SIP, the Inter-American Society of Journalism, in which he leads efforts on freedom of the press in the hemisphere. We're privileged by his and the other speakers' participation in this Hudson conference. After the three presentations, we'll have a short question and answer period. So save your questions and comments and keep them short. And without any further ado, I turn the mic over to Pepe.
Muchísimas gracias. Me siento muy privilegiado y muy agradecido al Hudson Institute por darme la posibilidad de estar esta mañana aquí en Washington. Hablo en español porque es mi lengua nativa. Podría haberlo hecho en inglés, pero la naturaleza de las cuestiones y la complejidad de los problemas me hace sentir más seguro en decirlo en el idioma en el que me manejo todos los días desde toda mi vida. El foco de mi presentación esta mañana se vincula naturalmente con Argentina y la presencia de un problema que no se limita exclusivamente al reconocimiento de un Estado palestino, sino muy vinculado con la problemática específica de mi país, a las consecuencias de la penetración de la República Islámica de Irán en Argentina y en otros países del mundo. Por cierto, me parece importante destacar que hoy, 25 de mayo, es el Día de la Argentina. Hoy es el Día de la Revolución de Mayo de 1810. Y es también el día en que asumió el gobierno, hace 8 años, el presidente Kirchner, cuya esposa es la actual presidenta de la Argentina. Así que, por favor, tengan en consideración este hecho. 8 años ininterrumpidos del gobierno del matrimonio Kirchner. Tengo poco tiempo para ser muy extenso, pero déjenme decir rápidamente que mi país, la Argentina, tiene una larga tradición de presencia positiva y fecunda de la colectividad árabe entre nosotros. Las relaciones de la Argentina con las comunidades árabes datan de prácticamente comienzos del siglo XIX. De hecho, como ustedes saben, hemos tenido un presidente, el presidente Menem, hijo de inmigrantes sirios. Fue casualmente el presidente Menem el primer presidente argentino que visitó en su condición de jefe de Estado el Estado de Israel. Un hecho muy significativo. La Argentina reconoció a Israel entre los primeros países del mundo que la reconocieron en 1948, durante la presidencia del general Perón. Para hacer una síntesis rápida, tengan también en cuenta que en 1960 Adolf Eichmann fue hallado y detenido por los servicios de seguridad israelíes en la Argentina, llevado a Israel, juzgado, sentenciado y ejecutado. Eichmann fue apenas uno de los numerosos criminales de guerra nazis que desgraciadamente encontraron refugio en mi país al terminar la Segunda Guerra Mundial. El vínculo de Perón con los judíos fue esencialmente bueno, también con Israel. Claro que aquel Israel de los años 40 era un país muy pequeño y muy débil, sin ninguna gravitación mundial. Pero uno podría conjeturar, lo cierto del caso es que el vínculo fue bueno. En 1992, la Argentina fue víctima del primero de 2 episodios de guerra que hemos sufrido, de una enorme gravedad. En marzo de 1992 fue demolida por un atentado terrorista la Embajada de Israel. Esto es 9 años antes del September 11. En 1994, otro atentado terrorista, reivindicado de una manera confusa desde Irán, destruyó la sede de la comunidad judía argentina, la más importante de América Latina por su número. 29 muertos en la embajada, 85 muertos en el local de la comunidad judía, conocida como AMIA, iniciales de Asociación Mutual Israelita Argentina. ambos crímenes permanecen impunes. No hay un solo procesado, mucho menos juzgado y condenado. El gobierno del presidente Menem oportunamente le concedió el rango de delegación a la misión de la Organización de Liberación Palestina. Para equilibrar, le regaló también al Reino de Arabia Saudita un importantísimo predio en el centro de Buenos Aires para que instalaran la mezquita Rey Fahd, cosa que sucedió. Fue un regalo del gobierno argentino. Como fue un regalo del gobierno argentino el edificio en donde hoy día funciona ya con rango de embajada la misión palestina. En un rápido desarrollo, porque estoy obligado por el tiempo, déjenme decirles que el presidente Kirchner, que un día como hoy hace 8 años comenzó su mandato, pretendió y se propuso tener un muy buen vínculo con la comunidad judía organizada de la Argentina, comprometiéndose a investigar el famoso y terrible atentado de 1994. Del de 1992 ya no se habla más en la Argentina. Ni siquiera, debo decirlo, el gobierno de Israel habla más de ese atentado. Creo que es el único caso en el mundo en donde una embajada israelí fue íntegra y totalmente destruida por un coche bomba. ¿Cuál ha sido, en esencia, la actitud del gobierno argentino ante el problema palestino y ante el hecho de que Irán fue acusado formalmente de haber inspirado, financiado, organizado y ejecutado el atentado de 1994? Una actitud que yo llamo de doble discurso, lo que se llamaría en inglés double standard. Por un lado, retóricamente hay un permanente reclamo de que el gobierno de Irán acepte la convocatoria de la justicia y entregue a los procesados iraníes a un juzgado internacional. O sea, desde un punto de vista retórico, el gobierno de los Kirchner aparece como permanentemente muy enrolado en la defensa de la causa y solidario con las víctimas. En los hechos reales, sin embargo, nada se ha conseguido. Y por el contrario, el gobierno argentino ha dado una serie de indicios preocupantes que permiten de alguna manera sugerir que ya no hay demasiadas expectativas ni demasiadas ilusiones de que se pueda llegar a un esclarecimiento de un episodio tan brutal. Si ustedes me preguntaran cuáles son las razones que hace que a tantos años de haber ocurrido el atentado contra la comunidad judía argentina, que fue un atentado contra la Argentina, porque los judíos argentinos somos obviamente argentinos, yo diría que se puede resumir en 3 palabras. Hay una cuota de complicidad en los escalones intermedios de los servicios de inteligencia y de la policía. Segundo, hay una cuota importante, porque es América Latina esto, de corrupción, o sea, de elementos policiales y de inteligencia que pueden haber sido comprados, literalmente, por la misión terrorista iraní. Y hay una tercera cuota que tampoco dejaría de lado de negligencia, de incompetencia y de poca profesionalidad en la investigación de hechos tan graves. Lo cierto del caso es que a tantos años la Argentina presenta en la materia un escenario muy preocupante. El gobierno argentino de Cristina Kirchner, efectivamente, siguiendo el liderazgo del presidente Lula, reconoció a la misión palestina como embajada. La misión palestina, sin embargo, más allá de que el presidente Abbas visitó el año pasado nuestro país, no tiene mayor actividad ni se cree que tiene muchos funcionarios, su perfil es más bien bajo. Pero esto yo no lo separaría de los esfuerzos importantes que hace el gobierno de Cristina Kirchner por incrementar los negocios y los viajes y los vínculos con los países árabes. Ella recientemente vino de una gira, la presidenta, por Kuwait, por los Emiratos Árabes Unidos, y envió a su canciller Héctor Timerman, al que han designado específicamente porque consideran que siendo judío es una garantía, a una entrevista extrañísima que yo denuncié oportunamente en la prensa argentina con el presidente El Assad en la ciudad siria de Alepo. Esta es una muy breve presentación. Seguramente en el periodo de preguntas y respuestas yo podré aclarar algunos otros temas. Tengo como impresión que la actitud argentina del gobierno es ambigua, incierta, zigzagueante, diríamos en español, o sea que no tiene un anclaje su política exterior en principios y en valores inmodificables. Es en consecuencia una actitud preocupante para muchos como quien les habla. Muchas gracias.
Samuel. Good morning. Although English is also not my mother tongue, I will make the effort so you don't have to make the effort. Brazil is certainly the biggest country in Latin America, and the episode of the recognition of non-yet existent Palestinian state shows how much influence it can, how much influence Brazilian influence can be on the other countries of Latin America, and almost immediately after Brazil recognized the right of the Palestinians to an independent state, most of the Latin American countries, with the exception of notable exception of Colombia, followed it, and it is certainly a way that Brazil has found to assert its position in the international scenario. It is nothing new considering the last 8 years of the Lula government, where Brazil has made every effort to make sure that it will deviate from the way the United States and its main allies behaved, especially regarding the Middle East. The Brazilian position regarding the Arab world is not new. We have had a history of alignment with Arab ideas, especially since the 1967 war and the oil embargo of the beginning of the 70s, when Brazil was heavily dependent on imported oil. Is not the case anymore. We have been self-sufficient, producing about 2 million barrels of oil a day in the last years, and the new discoveries point to Brazil as one of the largest oil exporters in the next years. So oil is not anymore the important anchor of Brazilian foreign policy, but it has been in the 70s, and it was at that time that Brazil recognized the Palestinians as an independent mission attached to the Arab League in our capital, and it is in those years also that Brazil voted in the United Nations to condemn Zionism as racism, a position that they have from which they have retreated after the end of the Cold War. When we look at Brazilian recognition of a Palestinian state, we have to be very careful about how deep this commitment is, for there has not been any kind of really important measure attached to the declaration. For example, I have called the Palestinian representative in our capital and asked him what that means for them, and they told me, we expect that to generate pressure on Israel. So Brazil's position and the following Brazil got in Latin America is expected to exert pressure on Israel and the United States when the matter comes to the United Nations in September. Another important aspect of how this is being dealt in Brazil. I talked to the man in the foreign ministry responsible for relations with the Middle East. We have a department that treats the whole Middle East as one block, and I asked, when he told me that Brazil supports negotiations, support the peaceful coexistence of two states, a Jewish state and a Palestinian state side by side, I asked him about the borders. What would mean to have, for Israel to have secure borders? He said, we respect all UN resolutions. So I asked him to forgive me for the question and said, Resolution 242 is interpreted by Brazil as the English version or the French version. It means that Israel has to leave de-occupied territories or occupied territories. And he said, we don't go into that level of the discussion. So I think this is emblematic of what Brazil's position is. It's much more a way, or Brazilian interference is much more a way of trying to show that Brazil participates of the process, that Brazil thinks it is important and can contribute somehow to bring the sides together, but there is no effective involvement of Brazilian diplomacy. Not the same occurred regarding Iran's nuclear program, and as you probably know, Brazil has been much involved in proposals to permit Iran to continue enriching uranium. There was the famous episode of the common proposal by Brazil and Turkey that led to nothing, mainly because Iran, right after the proposal was made, Iran declared that they will continue to enrich uranium to the level they think proper. But this has also to be seen in the proper light, for Brazil has its own problems regarding the nuclear enrichment process. We have an independent program. We have signed the TNP, but we have refused to sign the additional protocol. We don't like when the IAEA comes to Brazil for inspections, and there have been in the last 2 years several declarations of both the Minister of Defense and officials of the Foreign Ministry declaring the right of Brazil to complete the nuclear cycle, which is interpreted by Brazil as the right to possess also nuclear weapons. They are not going to declare that explicitly. My Argentinian friend would certainly agree with me that we are very happy without an arms race in South America, but the Brazilian perception that it is an important country, it desires and it is entitled to a permanent seat in the Security Council, is part of all these maneuvers in the international scenario, mainly its positioning sometimes in questions that confront especially the United States, to show that Brazil has an independent position. This has been much more deep and explicit during the Lula government of the last 8 years. We are still waiting to see what happens with the new president. She's a technocrat. She is not aiming at the exposition that our last president had, and we have seen some ambiguous moves of Brazilian diplomacy in the last months, or the first months of this year. For example, as much as Brazil has been close to Iran over the last years, Brazil for the first time voted in favor of a representative of the Commission for Human Rights to be sent to Iran to check what is going on there in terms of human rights abuse. So that is a change in the behavior of the Brazilian diplomacy of the last year. So on the other side, when there was a vote regarding the exclusion air zone in Libya, or the intervention of the NATO nations in Libya, Brazil abstained, as Germany, Russia, and China. Russia and China certainly had its own reasons regarding foreign intervention being approved. Brazil justified it by its regular positioning against intervention in internal matters of other countries. It may be seen as something related to our border problems with the FARC on the Colombian border, but that is still not clear. So we are still seeing a new Brazilian diplomacy informing. Obviously, the main objectives didn't change. There is very much importance attached to achieving a permanent seat in the Security Council, but most of the Brazilian analysts believe that this an empty quest, that there is no chance, not because Brazil is not important, not because the Argentinians will not support Brazil as the representative of South America, but because there are other problems related to India, related to Germany and Japan. So there will be no expansion of the Security Council, and consequently Brazil will not get a seat. And the criticism about Brazilian foreign policy is mainly related to the waste of effort that is being done facing the U.S. in important questions to try to attain something that is at the moment unachievable. Thank you very much.
Armando?
Good morning. It is a privilege to share some thoughts with you, thanks to the kind invitation of the Hudson Institute, so thank you very much. I have been asked to comment on the foreign policy of two very different countries, which have adopted a similar decision on the matter of recognizing the Palestinian state. Nicaragua and Costa Rica are neighbors and share characteristics that, viewed from a distance, may blur their profound differences. They have a common cultural heritage and geographical surrounding, but one has been an island of political stability, economic progress, and firm adhesion to the democratic community of nations, while the other is a victim of constant turmoil and economic stagnation. Costa Rica has a century of practice in democracy and its institutions, with a couple of brief interruptions, with democracy and its institutions, with a couple of brief interruptions. But Nicaragua has rarely enjoyed democratic rule and has yet to develop a strong system of institutions. Over the past 3 decades, Nicaragua's politics have been marked by the presence of the Sandinista Front for National Liberation and its leader, Daniel Ortega Saavedra, currently the president and a strong candidate for re-election within a system that is heavily inclined to favor him. Ortega's Marxist roots and those of his movement firmly align Nicaragua with the socialist camp and its recent Latin American reformulation, 21st century socialism, a confused and inarticulate ideological proposition born in Hugo Chávez's Venezuela, with the Bolivarian alliance of the Americas as its fundamental foreign policy expression. In consequence, Nicaragua's actions are guided by anti-imperialism, as conceived by Latin America's extreme left, confrontation with the United States and its allies, and including Israel, and the embracement of causes dear to that stream of thought. Costa Rica, on the other hand, is strongly supportive of the democratic community of nations, a close friend of the United States, and has enjoyed an extraordinary relationship with Israel, which only recently encountered areas of disagreement and conflict. Both nations, Nicaragua and Costa Rica, recognize the Palestinian state, but their motivations cannot be farther apart. I will try to explore those motivations, their historical background, and let you make the judgments. Costa Rica enjoyed the benefits of Jewish immigration, and there is a well-established community of Costa Rican Jews whose participation in the arts, business, politics, and the profession has enriched the nation in ways that are not proportional to their number. The country was among the first to recognize the Israeli state upon its foundation. Not long before doing so, it endorsed the United Nations Partition Plan, UN Resolution 181, adopted in November 1947. Recognition of the Palestinian state, according to our previous administration, which adopted the measure, is a consequence of the country's 1947 commitment to a two-state solution. The same reason is espoused by our current administration, inaugurated in May of last year. But beyond that explanation, there are other reasons for our nation's foreign policy shift. Costa Rica's strong relationship with Israel went as far as a heroic effort to maintain its embassy in Jerusalem when the rest of the world community, except El Salvador, had moved their representations to Tel Aviv. In retaliation for that stance, members of the Arab League discontinued diplomatic relations with Costa Rica in 1984, and the country faced a veto from the Arab bloc and its allies whenever it manifested aspirations to positions of influence within the United Nations. and other international organisms. President Oscar Arias' administration, inaugurated in May 2006, promptly formulated the country's return to the United Nations Security Council as a major foreign policy objective. Costa Rica had occupied a seat as a non-permanent member in 1974-75 and 1997-98, before its controversial decision to remain in Jerusalem after UN resolutions 476 and 478. President Arias, a Nobel Peace Prize winner for his efforts to end the Central American civil wars in the 80s, envisioned a larger role for Costa Rica in international politics, and the road to that broadened status passed through reestablishment and normalization of diplomatic ties with the Arab world. The first step in that direction was to move our embassy out of Jerusalem. By August 2006, the decision had been taken, and its abrupt announcement took the Israeli government by surprise. The timing was odd, because at the moment, Israel was engaged in military actions in Lebanon against Hezbollah. Thus, the measure risked confusion and could have been interpreted as a comment on Israel's attitudes at that particular time. A high-level Israeli visit, programmed for a date immediately following the announcement, was canceled and relations between the two countries chilled. The way was cleared to reestablishing relations with the Arab world and to end its opposition to Costa Rican aspirations in the concert of nations. During President Arias' administration, a quick succession of diplomatic exchanges reestablished relations with Algiers, Bahrain, Qatar, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Morocco, Oman, Tunisia, and Yemen. The most noticeable of these initiatives is the one that brings us together today. On February 5, 2008, Costa Rica and the Palestinian National Authority announced the establishment of diplomatic relations and the future exchange of ambassadors. Foreign Relations Minister Bruno Staño stated at the time that the decision deepened the gradual normalization of diplomatic ties with the Arab and Islamic worlds as an element of a foreign policy based on the opening of geographic and mental borders designed to achieve an intelligent insertion of Costa Rica in the world. Immediately following the announcement, Israel protested and once again canceled a high-level meeting with Costa Rican officials programmed for the following day. Argy Meckel, spokesman for Israel's Foreign Relations Ministry, pointed to the decision as contradictory with the friendship that traditionally linked both countries. In October 2007, a bit over a year after its decision to move the embassy, and little more than 3 months before the announcement of its new relationship with the Palestinian state, the country won election to a non-permanent position in the UN Security Council for the 2-year period beginning in 2008. It is important to point out that Costa Rica did not commit, in the process, to any specific position on the issue of borders. This is a significant difference with the cases of other countries, I believe Brazil and Argentina. In a recent speech delivered in San Jose during a forum on peace in the Middle East, attended, among others, by Palestinian representatives, current Foreign Relations Minister René Castro stated that Costa Rica urges the parties to reestablish the process of peace negotiations and mutual recognition and to agree on borders through negotiation. The minister emphasized that Costa Rica specially urges the Palestinian Authority not to adopt any decision regarding its self-determination outside the peace negotiations and without the direct participation of Israel and other involved parties. It is clear that the current administration is intent on mending fences with Israel. Minister Castro insisted on Costa Rica's disapproval of Israeli settlements, but had strong words of rejection to fundamentalist positions and aggressive actions on the part of Hamas. Although in January 2009, the Palestinian Authority accredited Riyad Mansour, its representative to the United Nations, as concurrent ambassador in San Jose, Costa Rica has not yet reciprocated, nor has it established a date to do so. In his speech, Foreign Minister Castro said that the country soon may appoint a concurrent ambassador to the Palestinian state. In preparation for this panel, I interviewed high government officials who said that Costa Rica has not been quick to reciprocate because it first wants to be satisfied that a viable peace process is on its way. Nicaragua's relations with the Arab world are of a very different nature. Marked by ideological inclinations and animosity towards the United States and its allies, the eloquence of two recent incidents should suffice to characterize its orientation in a broad sense. On June 1st, 2010, Managua severed its diplomatic ties with Israel over its action to stop the flotilla carrying aid to Gaza. On the 25th of February, it expressed its solidarity with the Libyan people and its leader, Muammar Gaddafi, and described them as victims of systematic interventionist attacks which are an impediment to the solution of internal problems, which no nation has been able to avoid in the course of its history, quote. During Daniel Ortega's first term in office in the 80s, another rupture of diplomatic relations with Israel occurred, simply as a measure of solidarity with the Palestinian people and the Organization for the Liberation of Palestine. By that time, ties between the PLO and the Sandinistas were already close, and in 1988, immediately following Yasser Arafat's declaration of Algiers proclaiming independence, Nicaragua joined Cuba and other nations in the Soviet bloc and the movement of non-aligned countries in recognizing the Palestinian state. Recognition of the Palestinian state by Nicaragua and Costa Rica cannot then be explained by the same factor. You may judge if Costa Rica's objectives were significant enough, but have no doubt as to the differences. Understanding those differences is a key to accurate analysis, especially now that all-encompassing references to a wave of Latin American recognition of the Palestinian state may hide those differences. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Armando. We have time for two short questions. No questions? Well, you were the first one, please. Yeah, they're going to give you a microphone here. Please name an affiliation.
I'm Jack Minker. I'm a professor emeritus from the University of Maryland in computer science, and I'm a member of the board of the American Jewish. I'm a member of the American Jewish International Relations Board. What is the likelihood, in your analysis, both of you, as to how the final vote will be when this comes up in the United Nations? Will Costa Rica vote to abstain or against the U.S. And same question for you in Brazil, because it was ambiguous as to the relationship.
I believe Brazil will vote for it. There is no doubt. They have recognized it in advance of any vote, so it's a very clear sign of what their attitude will be, and it will generate still another step of confrontation with the United States, but it will be a way for Brazil to state its position, its independent position. I would dare to say that if the U.S. would vote for, maybe Brazil would vote against.
Rather than speculate on the matter, I can tell you that I did some reporting in preparation for this conversation, and very high sources in our foreign ministry assured me that a decision has not been made. So Costa Rica, in that sense, is still up in the air. Which way do I think we will eventually lean, or the country will eventually lean? I think it will possibly vote for. Will vote yes. I think it will vote for the Palestinian position. There is, however, a possibility of abstention.
I'd like just to add a short comment. In my humble opinion, it really doesn't matter because once the vote passes and the majority of the members of the United Nations vote in favor of the establishment of an independent Palestinian state, the situation on the ground will not change. So the United States will probably veto whatever is important in the Security Council. So if the whole of Latin America is positioned for an independent Palestinian state, that's not going to increase trade with a newly existent Palestinian trade, because it's not what is happening today, and that is not going to help. Just to give you an idea of the size of the commerce, Brazil and Israel have total foreign exchange relationship of $1.6 billion, of which 3/4 is exports from Israel to Brazil, and Brazil exports less than $500 million to Israel. So if that relationship is not significant, relationship with the Palestinians cannot be a fraction of it.
If I may add one other thing, there is concern in our foreign ministry over the unification of the Palestinian factions and the fact that Hamas is one of the factors of that unification. So that would make a case for an abstention.
My name is Warren Manderson. I'm here speaking for myself. 2 points I think I'd like to make. One of them is, I think you were incorrect when you stated what is in UN Resolution 242. It doesn't say that Israel should evacuate, whatever your word specific, all of the territories.
No. What I said is there are two different interpretations. One is the French translation, one is the English version, and the English version says from territories, and the French version says from the territories. And that has been a discussion about how much of the territories Israel has to relinquish, and this is something that the Brazilians didn't relate to. But
well, the American version translation is territories, not
okay,
all,
it's the
not
English.
the
It's the English version. That's the discussion I pointed to.
But the other question is, I didn't hear enough of a discussion about the viability of a state. Palestinian state, of course, has never existed in history. Palestinian people, as such, didn't really exist till about 64. There was never a currency, a government, a legal system, you name it. How do you create you didn't go into how the thinking that's going on in your foreign ministries on how you would create a state that never existed, a state that since its history, going back to 64 and before that, has a history of hostility, incitement to violence. One of the key issues, refusal to accept and acknowledge a Jewish state of Israel, which might go back to the ideology in the minds of many Islamic fundamentalists, and a state which glorifies suicide bombers, participates in world forums on BDS, this false concept of apartheid. How do you vote for a state which is engaged in those kinds of activities continuously, no abatement, none whatsoever, even during these past 2 years where there's been a heavier concentration on some kind of negotiation?
Excuse me, sir. We have very limited time. So you ask the question, and that's it. No.
I will be very happy to come for another seminar and discuss all these items, but we were invited here to say why the Brazilian government would support the creation of a Palestinian state, and it is in order to get enough votes whenever there is a proposal for expanding the Security Council, so Brazil can get a permanent seat in the Security Council. And all the items that you mentioned will not deter Brazil from doing it.
A mí me gustaría, aun cuando no se trata de una pregunta, aportarle a los asistentes 2 o 3 reflexiones de orden histórico. Más allá del caso palestino propiamente, las naciones de América Latina tienen una historia que debe ser comprendida con reclamos legítimos respecto de cuestiones de soberanía. Basta mencionar la creación, por ejemplo, de la República de Panamá, cuyos orígenes siguen siendo sumamente polémicos y tuvo que ver muchísimo con la construcción del Canal de Panamá. Pero en otro orden de cosas, ha habido reconocimiento muy rápido de la comunidad internacional para países que tampoco existían. El caso de Kosovo, por ejemplo. De modo tal que mi sugerencia es también, con toda humildad, es interpretar los vínculos de América Latina con el mundo árabe e islámico a la luz del proceso de afirmación nacional de los últimos 50, 60 años, y no como un caso aislado que solamente involucra el cuestionamiento del Estado de Israel, que obviamente es absolutamente censurable y que quienes acá estamos nos oponemos. Pero es un asunto complejo y que tiene mucho que ver con la historia concreta, específica, tangible de América Latina y de sus luchas de independencia.
There is a gentleman here.
My name is Hassan Abdurrahman, and I am the former chief representative of the Palestinian mission here in Washington. And I happen to have attended the forum that you talked about in San Jose, Costa Rica. I served before at the United Nations. I'm going to ask one question. How much weight does the fact that the Latin American states voted in 1947 for the partition resolution to establish a Jewish Israeli state and an Arab Palestinian state has in the decision of the Latin American countries to recognize the independent Palestinian state today? Because in the speech that Dr. Oscar Arias gave at that forum in San Jose on March 13th, he referred to the moral and legal responsibilities that the Latin American countries has vis-a-vis the Palestinian people to recognize and ensure actually the establishment of an independent Palestinian state in accordance with the partition resolution of 1947. Without referring, of course, to the borders, because going to the United Nations and affirming the Palestinian Authority leading the effort at the United Nations to establish the Palestinian state on the borders of 1967 is affirmation for the recognition of Israel also within those borders. So it's not only a one-sided recognition of the Palestinian state, but also recognition of the state of Israel within the 1967 boundaries. Thank you.
As I mentioned, the partition plan is quoted as justification for Costa Rican's foreign policy shift. And it was quoted as a justification by the administration that established diplomatic relations with the Palestinian state, and it is quoted in the same sense by the current administration. Now, there is a difference between that justification and what I believe are the true motivations. And the true motivations are related to the things that I discussed earlier. Costa Rica, because of its stance on the Jerusalem question and whether our embassy should have been there or not, lost its ties with the Arab world and decided to repair them. And one of the things it had to do was to move the embassy and began talks with the Palestinian Authority. And all of this was done in pursuit of foreign policy goals, which had to do with the UN National Security Council and with securing for the country a larger role in international politics. I think those are the motivations that lie beneath the legal justification. my country would probably be a neighborhood of a big city in Brazil, but it's interesting to see that the motivations are, to some degree, similar. And I wanted to, let's say, open the, move the veil and show you what I believe, honestly, truly happened.
Brazil has always had an image of an important actor in the creation of Israel and the decision of 1947 at the UN because of the Brazilian presidency at the moment. And they have voted at the moment for the creation of both states, which was something that was not accepted by the Arab world. So there is not a point in reinforcing now the creation of a Palestinian state in that context. I think it's a different context, and the borders of 1967 are not seen by Israel as the borders in which they want to be reaffirmed. So when Brazilians when the Brazilian foreign ministry that is very in favor of accommodation and solution to the conflict talk about the 67 borders, they reaffirm the point that there should be negotiations, and if it has to happen through a swap of territories, they recognize basically the fact that the big settlements will have to be incorporated into Israeli territory. I see you don't like it, but I am talking about the Brazilian position. They are, in principle, of the opinion that the big settlements will be incorporated into Israel, and that it is an acceptable base for the negotiation of the final borders. Sure, exactly. That's the point.
Excuse me, sir. Unfortunately, we don't want to infringe on the time of the next panel. So, I'm sorry again, we'll have to end our panel now. Let's give our speakers a round of applause.